Science tells us that brains, minds, are built, not born. And at the center of this dynamic architecture are a set of skills called executive function and self-regulation.
Children's self-regulation and executive function are key ingredients in their lifetime performance. It's not just about learning language or learning numbers or learning colors.
We have to be able to work effectively with others, with distractions, with multiple demands. These actually are skills that contribute to the productivity of the American workforce.
Just look at your shapes. What should you have done next?
Educators, I think, are looking for just this sort of thing. And when we describe what we mean by executive function, they say, yes, that's it. That's exactly, the problem. These kids, they can tell me these rules, but they can't actually use them.
What's this?
A toolbox.
A toolbox.
What is executive function?
Safety goggles.
Safety goggles.
Probably the best way to think about it is sort of like an air traffic control system in the brain. Just like an air traffic control system has to manage lots of airplanes going on lots of runways and really exquisite timing and so on. A child has to manage a lot of information and avoid distractions. We really think of it as involving working memory and inhibitory control and mental flexibility. Take a situation where a child is having to take turns. So first of all, the child has to have inhibitory control. The child has to be able to stop whatever he or she is doing and let the other child take a turn.
Cute.
But when it's your turn again, you also have to remember what it is you're supposed to be doing. So that pulls on working memory. If the children who are taking the turns after you do something unpredictable, you have to be able to adjust what you're going to do next. And that requires mental flexibility. Children who are struggling with these capacities often look like children who just aren't paying attention, or children who are deliberately not controlling themselves.
If you don't have self-regulation, you act out and the teacher puts you in timeout, and so then you miss part of the learning that's going on, and then you are more upset because you're behind, and so you act out, and so you get this downward spiral.
How does executive function develop?
7. And +4.
In little children, and even in the infant and toddler years, you begin to see the roots of executive functioning skills. What's going on in our brains is unbelievably intricate and complicated.
The prefrontal cortex, or the front third of the brain, is important for executive function. But it's more than just prefrontal cortex. This region doesn't act alone. It's involved in controlling your behavior through its interactions with all other parts of the brain. The brain goes from a situation where you've got nearest neurons communicating very strongly with each other and ignoring the rest of the brain, to these widespread networks that are connecting these different areas. Executive function changes over the life course. It improves radically over the first few years.
I got a match prime.
It continues to improve throughout adolescence. It's not until early adulthood that you have the adult-type networks that are very strongly activated that connect different brain regions together.
Let's take notes.
Also, we believe that executive functions can be trained.
It's just like going to the gym. So the more you practice in these areas, the stronger the capacity is likely to become, because you're hoping to strengthen those neural connections.
You're at 24.
Slowly but surely, you're going to be able to step back, and that child's going to go into the world with these skills where they can get along with other people, change rules, and they can be flexible, and they can accomplish new things, and they're unafraid.
I got bit by my dog in my arm. Oh dear.
If we don't learn these skills, During the childhood and adolescent years when they're coming online, we are really ill-equipped as an adult to hold a job, to maintain a marriage, to raise children, to get along with each other, to basically be part of a civil society.
You're okay.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rosie O'Brien Wojtek, and I'm the Assistant Executive Director for the Connecticut Association of Schools. We're excited to partner with the Connecticut State Department of Education and the Office of Early Childhood to bring you Here They Come, a convening to assist in the 2022-23 school year transition. We began talking about the importance of a convening like this one last December when we heard across the state the issues administrators and teachers were facing from the fallout of the COVID pandemic. We realized that this next phase of what is being dubbed as the new normal brings about many new issues and challenges that require us to reflect upon and re-examine our current and past practices, some of which are highly successful and some of which may no longer be our best practices moving forward. For example, one of the ahas that a number of educators are realizing is that in the past, when students arrived in our classrooms, administrators and teachers expected that the students were ready to learn and achieve the pedagogical knowledge and skills for that grade level. However, this morning, we will posit that as educators and stakeholders, we must turn the kaleidoscope and look at our students entering our schools and our classrooms differently. Instead of them being ready for us, we must be ready for them. We need to welcome our students with open arms, assess their learning needs, and design personalized learning targets that will not only fill in their achievement gaps, but address their physical, social, and emotional needs and accelerate their learning. We've heard loud and clear from educators at all levels across Connecticut that our students are coming to us with greater needs than ever before. The impact of the pandemic on children's social emotional development, self-regulations, learning experiences, and skills across all domains is nothing like we've ever seen. This appears to have been exacerbated for our youngest children. That's why the convening this morning is so important for all of our early childhood educators and stakeholders across Connecticut. Once again, on behalf of CSDE, OEC, and CAS, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this very timely and crucially important early childhood convening. This morning, we will examine research, explore best practices, consider practical applications, and review authentic learning structures to better understand what's working and what's not working, and provide resources and tools to enable a smooth and successful transition for every student as they move from kindergarten to first grade. You'll have the opportunity to learn with experts, teachers, and administrators who will share real-life examples and evidence-based best practices that they have found support young children's emotional well-being and skill development. We're excited about our program and glad that you're joining us. We began this morning's convening with one of our favorite videos, Executive Functioning Skills for Life and Learning, which is part of the In Brief series from Harvard's University Center on the Developing Child. We wanted to open with this video because it exemplifies the skills of executive functioning that allows us to focus on multiple streams of information at the same time and revise our plans as necessary. Learning and practicing these lifelong skills are an integral part of every child's development and the foundation of a high-quality early childhood program. This video sets the stage for our conversations this morning around not only executive functioning, but also the importance and the power of allowing children to learn through purposeful play. We're very excited to have E.A. Aschenbrenner present in a few minutes on executive function and active engagement and playful learning approaches to increase self-regulation and outcomes for children. We also have a very special virtual field trip to Oswegatchie Elementary School in Waterford, Connecticut to see children actively engaged in high quality learning that's aligned with state and district standards and expectations while allowing students to practice the skills of executive functioning during authentic, playful learning. This is definitely a must-see exemplary school model of the early learning approaches that EA will be describing during her presentation. We also have an expert panel of educators from across the state who will be discussing from their different perspectives the why, what, when, and how of designing high quality developmentally appropriate early childhood programs that are aligned with national, state, and local standards, expectations, and curricula. Our panelists will also share examples of how to actively engage students in authentic learning experiences, purposeful play, and executive function skills that are integrated and embedded throughout the child's learning. Finally, you will leave this convening with ideas, tools, and strategies that will assist you in planning for the transition of young children for the 2022-23 school year. These resources will be shared during the convening and also posted with the recording on our websites. So before we get started, just a couple of reminders and housekeeping items. Because of our large attendance this morning, everyone has been muted and your audio and video have been turned off. Please use the chat to communicate with each other, share any thoughts that resonate with you during this convening, as well as any ideas that you have and that you use to actively engage students and enhance the teaching and learning experiences in your own classrooms and schools. Also, please use the chat feature to ask questions, share ideas, and let us know if you experience technical problems during this Zoom meeting, as we will be monitoring the chat. Please use the Q&A feature to ask questions for EA and our panelists, as we will be doing our best to answer as many of your questions as possible during this convening, either during the presentation or at the end of the panel conversation. So use the chat to chat, use the Q&A for the questions so we can keep those separate. Before you leave our convening this morning, we would love to have your feedback about the convening. Your feedback is important to us, so please take a minute to complete our brief evaluation before you turn off your computer and start doing something else. We will be dropping the link into the chat now and throughout the morning. This convening is being recorded and will be posted on the CAS, OEC, and CSDE websites, along with any resources and materials for you to view again, share with your colleagues, and use for professional development with your school communities. If you registered for this webinar, you will receive a link to the recording and resources as soon as they are posted on our website. Please be sure to share the links with your colleagues and friends once they're posted. Finally, we at CAS would like to gratefully acknowledge our wonderful corporate partners, Pullman and Cumley and Horseman, sorry about that, for helping to make this early childhood convening possible. We thank them for their continuing support of our CAS professional learning opportunities for principals and educators across Connecticut. So once again, welcome to our Here They Come, a convening to assist in the 2022-23 school year transition. We're glad you're joining us this morning. It's now my pleasure to introduce one of my colleagues and friends, Dr. Melissa Hickey. Dr. Hickey is the Director of Reading and Literacy at the Connecticut State Department of Education. Welcome, Dr. Hickey.
Thank you, Dr. Wojtek. So good morning to everyone. On behalf of the CSDE, I welcome you to a convening to assist in the 2022-23 transition to kindergarten and first grade. As Dr. Wojtek shared, this convening is occurring today as a result of all of you who voiced your needs, concerns, and questions on how to best assist this upcoming cohort of young children and promote their well-being and increase their skills. We all know that the last few years have brought numerous challenges and have required skillful, swift adaptations. The CSD is proud of our pre-K adult ed school communities as you have navigated stressful situations and continued to move students forward. As educators, we often have expectations of where students should be when they enter school and walk into our classroom doors. These expectations are influenced by numerous factors, including our past experiences, our personal feelings, the starting point of our curricula, and our yearly back to school lessons. To best understand and meet the students, our students who are coming to school this coming fall, we must get to the heart of what they are feeling and thinking, what they currently know and are able to do. This information is what will best guide us in creating a culture and system of supports and providing instruction that best meets them where they are currently and to successfully bring them to where they should and could be. If ever there was a moment for us to come together, to collaboratively be innovative and creative, to come together to plan, develop, and put into place high impact strategies to move forward each of our students, now is the time. That is the purpose of this convening, to come together, to see real life successes, to reflect upon current practices, and assist each other in understanding the change that is necessary to best meet the needs and successfully support young students. So enjoy your time today.
Thank you, Dr. Hickey. Next, I would like to introduce another one of my colleagues and friends, Dr. Andrea Brunell, who is the Early Childhood Special Education Coordinator for the Connecticut State Department of Education, to introduce our first guest speaker. Welcome, Dr. Brunell.
Thank you, Dr. Wojtek and Dr. Hickey. I'm thrilled to see such a large crowd today with us. The level of interest shows us how important and timely our conversation today is. We know that all of you are very busy and have many competing priorities, and we sincerely thank you for choosing to spend part of your day with us. We're so pleased that we have Elizabeth A. Aschenbrenner, known to the field as EA, as a presenter with us today. EA was formerly the Director of Early Childhood Initiatives for EastCon, with oversight of statewide professional development projects for the Connecticut State Department of Education and the Office of Early Childhood, as well as an administrator of early childhood programs. Since 2012, EA has been the project coordinator for the Executive Function and Purposeful Play Initiative. EA has worked to develop and provide training and coaching to teachers, instructional coaches, and administrators pre-K through grade 1, designed to promote executive function and active engagement in learning aligned to state and national standards. She works with school districts, community-based programs, and has received funding through the LEGO Community Fund US, as well as local school districts. In addition to her passion about active engagement and learning and executive function, she has expertise in dual language learning. She has been a teacher in Connecticut, California, and Texas, and I'm very, very pleased that she's my colleague and my friend, and I'll turn it over to EA.
Good morning, everybody. Technology is supposed to be our friend, so I'm going to ask you to bear with me as I navigate this. I want to start by sharing my screen, and let's see if this works. I want to start off by thanking you all for all of the tremendous work that you have done over the past 2 years as we were trying to negotiate our roles as educators and supporting young children and their families through unprecedented times. I really want to thank you for that. I also want to thank my colleagues for organizing this convening, and I want to share with you what I find an irony. All of my colleagues today wished we could have been doing this in person, right? Because the title of this session is Executive Function and Active Engagement in Playful Learning, which is a bit hard to do when we're doing something in a webinar format. However, what I think it does is that it highlights the challenges that we have faced over the past several years as we have been trying to keep true to instruction and engagement while we were engaged with various different formats. So thank you all. I also want to do a shout out to my colleagues who are joining me today, who have really taken the plunge, saw the sense of urgency even before the pandemic about the importance of addressing executive function and active engagement in playful learning. And certainly a shout out to the LEGO Community Fund, who has generously and importantly supported this work over the last several years. So I want to start with talking about some of the takeaway messages, right? We think about these as learning objectives. Takeaway messages for me as executive function skills really matter. They have mattered for a really long time, but I think because of the pandemic and the experiences that children have had with increased anxiety, decreased interest and willingness to take risks, we really have this opportunity to really think about the importance of executive function skills, especially as kids have come to us, even pre-pandemic, much more dysregulated than ever. So I also want to sort of stress that sometimes the underlying behaviors, as Dr. Deborah Leong did in the Harvard video, indicated that there's usually executive function issues or deficits that go along with some of those presenting behaviors. Another takeaway message, of course, and you've heard this from my colleagues about the importance of purposeful play. I want to stress the notion of children's need to be able to predict and plan, and also that agency matters, choice and control. So one of the things you'll hear me talk a lot about, and I think you'll hear my colleagues talk about today, is the importance of a plan. One of the things that we know is that when we know what a plan, when we know what we can predict, then we can set a plan, and that helps us organize our thinking and our behavior. So here's a brief outline of what I hope to address during our session together before we have input from our panel. So for those of you who got to see the Harvard video, just as a brief review, the 3 core executive functions are inhibitory control of attention and action. That is about self-control or discipline. And that's both physical, emotional, being able to maintain when you have a strong feeling and you really want to behave appropriately. The second one is selective or sustained attention. And I think this one is really important. It's about, despite frustration or boredom, how you sort out the multiple stimuli that come and focus on what you're being asked to do. The second one is working memory. And I will go through all of these in a little more detail, holding information in your mind and being able to work with it. And then cognitive flexibility, thinking outside the box and being able to adapt to different rules, problem solving. And this is actually where creativity comes in as well. So when you think about as children get older, these are important skills that we want kids to be able to have in order to be able to be successful learners. One of the things I just want to indicate is I'm going to briefly run through these slides about the research about the importance of executive function as predictors for academic success and academic difficulties. What you'll notice when the slides are posted is that I have links, website links on each of the slides to make it easier for you to dive deeper into some of this work should you choose. But I think that one of the things that I find interesting is that the Harvard video was done about 10 years ago. They also have a working paper around building the air traffic control system. Subsequent to that, we've had much more research that supports the importance of executive function. So just really briefly, these are some very large-scale studies that followed kids longitudinally that really indicated the importance of executive function. I'm really not going to read these slides to you, but again, you can refer back to them. So again, this is another study that has a large number of participants that followed kids through 5th grade and really demonstrated the impact that if children have strong executive function skills, those are actually connected to better math and literacy outcomes. One of the things that our colleagues mentioned is that connection to social emotional. So this is the CAS-CIAC framework. And one of the things I hope you see in this is the direct connection to the importance of executive function skills to being competent social emotional learners. In the Harvard video, and I'm going to do this very simplistically, right? One of the things that we know is that logic and reasoning tends to happen in the prefrontal cortex. So we really need to really think of, as educators, about the importance of how we get to the prefrontal cortex for kids. So I want you, that's an image that was really helpful for me as an educator. I was trying to understand the neuroscience with child development in order to really think about what we might be doing in terms of impactful instructional strategies. So one of the things that this slide will indicate is if we understand the importance of developing executive function skills, we recognize that executive function skills develop very rapidly in early childhood. So if we are really intentional in supporting the development of executive function skills, we really have an opportunity to have huge, huge impact for kids. The thing that I also want to say is that I think many teachers do many things in their classroom that really support executive function skills. They might not necessarily, are not necessarily consciously aware of that. So I think that part of our work in supporting executive function is really to really think about how we are conscious of that. So one of the things I also want to think about is while the video and we are presenting these core executive functions in separate category, they don't operate alone. They actually interact with each other. So just very briefly, a closer look at executive function in terms of inhibitory control. And again, as I said, those are both action and attention. So we really think about kids coming in and supporting them to have more inhibitory control as well as attention. So what I'd like to do is actually engage you in one of the project strategies that we use. I'm going to put on the screen some slides that engage kids in movement. Now, I'm going to ask you, you can either stand up and move around or you can just do the arm movements. But what I'd like to do is engage you in this game. And then I'd like to really think about what it is that kids are learning by being engaged in this game. So we call it freeze game. One of the things that happens with freeze game is that kids, we hold up a picture card that's a very simplistic drawing. And then we play music. We ask kids not to get into the position. We ask them to dance or move. And then when the music stops, we want them to freeze in the exact position of the card. You ready to give it a go? So again, please move around. All right. Next card. We could oftentimes with kids we'll practice the positions before we actually do them. Terrific. All right, we might need to practice this one just a little bit. Woohoo! All right. This one is usually the one that we have to show kids it is time to sit down. So we will conclude with this one. Somehow I have lost the music, so let's just all sit down, please. So what I'd like you to do is think about the skills that children are learning that are executive function related skills while engaged in freeze game. And please type that into the chat. So there's a lot about following directions, body awareness, self-control, working memory, sustained attention, inhibitory control, right? So it really is, we're asking kids in this very simple activity to really maintain their body in space, to be able to move, to pay attention to auditory and visual stimulus, but not react to the visual stimulus until the music stops. So it actually, what looks like a very simple strategy and game, that's a lot of fun, kids love to play this, really develops some really strong inhibitory control as well as working memory, right? You've got to hold on to the rules and keep that in mind while you're actually moving as well. So again, just a very simple strategy that also got you hopefully moving around and engaged and excited. The thing that I also want to say right now is that some people call these things a brain break. And one of the things that we know about young children is that they're very concrete, right? So hopefully when you say brain break, young kids don't think their brains are going to break. But really importantly, brains are working when kids are engaged in these types of activities. And what I don't want kids to do is get the idea that maybe their brains aren't working when they're moving and engaged in tasks like this. I know it's simple, but it's just the way that we use words and we think about learning for young children that is impactful. So the second component of executive function is working memory. And working memory is actually the one that my colleagues who are psychologists and neuroscientists will say have taken a tremendous decrease working memory skills as a part of the pandemic and the way that we have delivered instruction, which makes sense. Once you think about it, right? So working memory is something that's something like short-term memory, right? It operates over a few seconds. It's temporary storage. You're manipulating information while you're focusing attention. So what this allows you to do, right, is revise information while you, so it's like learning and doing on the fly. I think that's one of the things that's really important to remember. And I'm so excited that MRIs have changed this, because when I first started doing this work and understanding the importance of executive function to our kids, I was told that it was like we as adults could retain 7 things in our head. And as it turns out, it's really about 4. But the important thing is that when we think about young children, we think that they can retain about 2 things, right? So when we think about multi-step directions, are we giving too many? That kids can't really remember what the directions are that you've asked. Sometimes kids can remember the first direction, sometimes the last, maybe the middle. But if there's too many step directions, they're really hard to remember and then act on. And the other thing I want to do is really just say the importance of understanding working memory and the processing of dual language learners in your classrooms, right? So they hear something in English. They typically now have to translate it or decode it and encode it into their dominant language and then perform a task. So that really takes a time. And so the importance of visual mediators as well as limited instructions matter to all children, but especially to children who are dual language learners. One of the things that we talk about to enhance working memory, again, that are very short activities are matching games, concept relay games. I have Who Has, Simon Says, very simple games that really support and engage children, but also support working memory and inhibitory control. The third component that we talk about in executive function is cognitive flexibility. And I know the Harvard video talks about it as mental flexibility, but these are really the components of cognitive flexibility that are flexible thinking, adjusting your actions, problem solving, understanding and being able to follow through with different rules. Intentionally investing more mental effort in tasks that are difficult and creativity. So really think about children who are transitioning into kindergarten. Think about how many different rules they have to understand and negotiate based upon the setting, right? There's getting on the bus, there's getting off the bus, there's the arrival behavior, taking off the backpack, getting messages out, coming to circle, the different rules for small group time, independent work time, the different rules and messages. Are you feeling overwhelmed by this right now? When I think about this, when kids are going to PE or makerspace, or they're going to art or music or library, they're all different rules that children have to understand and adapt to. What I'd also, so here's a prompt that I would like you to think about, and again, please put this into the chat. I think responding to a writing prompt is a tremendously difficult skill. So what I'd like you to do is think about, from a whole component of child growth and development, what skills are necessary for a kindergartner or a first grader to successfully engage in a writing prompt. Thanks for responding. So I think what we have here in the chat are things that are really important that highlight, I think, the complexity of a writing prompt, right? First of all, you have to have the fine motor control in order to be able to hold a pencil and a crayon, right? You also have to have that, that sort of the spatial awareness. You have to be able to organize the materials that you're going to use in order to successfully respond to the writing prompt. You have to have background knowledge, right, about and have an idea in your head about what you're going to write, and retain that idea, right? Remember it. How many times have you watched kids trying to even come up with an idea with background knowledge? So my point in talking about this, right? And then, oh, I'm sorry, there's also the mechanics of starting at the top left and going across right and then doing the sweep. And then there's the word spacing and many other things that are involved. I share this because I believe strongly in the value of writing. I share this as an example of what we need to be mindful of all of the demands and skills that are required for kids in order to be successful with that particular ask, and what we might need to do differently in order to sort of scaffold or develop those skills across many domains in order for kids to be successful writers. So what I want to do just now is just do a few things about the brain. I promise you I won't spend too much time, but the notion of how we get to the prefrontal cortex is very complicated. And this might seem this is much more simplistic than it is, but what happens is, first, right, we've got to focus attention. And we really understand that there are many, many competing demands for kids' attention. So it might be a speck of dirt on the floor that gets kids' attention in a whole group. It might be a very busy rug. It might be all of the anchor charts all over the room. It might be a child next to them, sort of nudging them. It might be the loudspeaker that's, the speaker that's coming over into the classroom with announcements. My point is, there are many, many different stimuli that get to kids that are visual, that are auditory, they might be motor stimuli. And we have to make a decision about what to attend and what to ignore. And so one of the things that's really important when we think about sustaining attention is that novelty and curiosity are prioritized. So if something is of interest, it's novel, it's engaging, that would be the hook that would get kids engaged. What I would also say is that perceived threat receives the highest priority. So once we get attention, then we need to go through what we would call the amygdala, again, very simplistic, or the emotional switching station, right? If the brain is in a high state of stress, it's hard to get to the prefrontal cortex, right? If there's too much stress and there's high emotion, and we talk about hot and cold executive function skills, we would tend to have fight, flight, or freeze. So one of the things that we really want to think about is that how do we help kids be calm and relaxed? There were some things in the chat about mindfulness that are really important to really think about. What are those conditions of learning for children? And what do we need to do in our classrooms in order to have kids be more calm, relaxed, interested, so that they can be engaged in learning? If kids are really anxious, if they're afraid they're not going to be successful, if there's some things happening at home, one of the things that would happen is that their emotions are so high, and this happens to for us as adults as well, our emotions are so high that we really can't get to our prefrontal cortex for logic and reasoning. So in my mindset as an educator, I always think about what are those conditions of learning for the whole class, but also for individual children to really reduce their anxiety, be willing to take risks, and be willing to engage in learning. I share this slide. I think it's just incredibly powerful to look at these two MRIs, or I think they're PET scans too, that look at a child. Look, the brain scan on the left is a child who has low anxiety, more of a positive climate. And what you can see very clearly is the access to the prefrontal cortex, right? You can see that that's happening for the child. On the right is a child who has significant trauma. And so again, what this does very vividly is demonstrate my point about the fact that when kids are stressed, they have high anxiety. There's a reading prompt that they don't think they're going to be successful at, just as an example, that it ends up being in the lower part, or the emotional response system. So it's really hard to access and engage kids in learning when there's that level of high anxiety. So again, that message for me is, how do we engage with the prefrontal cortex and think about those conditions of learning that support that. Again, this is work from Harvard that says that these are really important factors. And there's the top three are things that are really important and consistent with the impacts that we can have in school, right? Facilitating supportive adult-child relationships. One of the things we have always known is that a positive relationship matters. It matters tremendously for children to feel safe, secure, and willing to take risks in learning. That notion of self-efficacy and perceived control. And one of the things I think we can appreciate from the pandemic is that children, and some of us, didn't feel like we had a lot of control, right? We needed to pivot, we needed to change. There were things that were evolving in a very rapid and quick period of time. And the third is really a lot of what we're also talking about, is strengthening self-regulation in order to feel like we have agency. We talk about this notion of stress, and just pointing out that positive stress is a really good thing. When you are curious and you're anxious to learn, it actually increases our engagement. Negative stress, not so much. And I think I've talked a lot already about toxic stress. So really keeping in mind, what are those factors that are interesting and engaging and provide the hook for kids to learn? I hope that, again, one of my takeaway messages is executive function skills really, really matter. And we can actually do something to support executive function development in the classroom. So I would also just want to say that there's been some selling of computer programs that would say that they support executive function. Quite frankly, that hasn't been proven yet in the research. So I just say approach those with caution, because the real-time things that we do in the classroom with kids and in school actually really matter. I share this with you this was a large-scale study that was funded by the Massachusetts U.S. Department of Education, and what they did was they had it was actually experimental design, where some districts engaged in this work and others did not, so that they could do a comparison of outcomes for kids. And so what we saw in the strategies that my colleagues are using in this longitudinal, very well-funded research project was the positive impact of these strategies, including play, to executive function, including reading and vocabulary and math. The important one that I've highlighted is the level of cortisol. So we know that cortisol is a stress hormone. And so when kids are engaged in these activities and they're engaged in playful learning, their stress level goes down. And I think my colleagues will address the impacts that this has had in their schools. So I've talked about the brain needing to predict and organize. When kids know a plan and we know a plan, it helps to reduce anxiety. One of the things that teachers know in their classrooms is what the schedule is and what's going to happen. And we really need to really be able to be much more metacognitive in our review of that schedule and being able to work with kids. So what I'm going to do now is just share a couple of those strategies that help kids be able to predict so that they can plan and organize their behavior. We do want to work on moving from adult regulation to self-regulation. And I think this is really important, that I want us to really be thinking about how many times during the day children, other than their expected behavior, actually get to regulate or have choice or agency. Oftentimes it's adults telling them what to do, when to do it, and sometimes how to do it. So this notion of working towards self-regulation and agency is going to be really important. So this was mentioned by my colleagues as part of the introduction, but I think it is worth just really thinking again about where we want to be in the work of Lev Vygotsky in the zone of proximal development. We really want to be at that next level of stretch for kids, right? In terms of what their next skill level is. So that's where that notion of trajectory of learning comes in, really to understand where that next level is. If kids already know something and they can do it by themselves, we don't need to teach it and reteach it and reteach it. That's where frustration and boredom can come in. Likewise, if it's too far of a stretch beyond children's capability, again, they could be very frustrated, increase their anxiety, and shut down their willingness to learn. There's another concept of cognitive load theory, and I just mentioned the person who's responsible for that, but it's that notion of what is the right amount of information and learning that we can provide kids without being overloaded. One of the things we talk about in our work is the notion of limited attention to objectives, right? You know, we could take any activity and load many different objectives, content objectives into them, but we really want to be mindful of this notion of where our targets want to be, which is in that zone of proximal development. So I just want to say a couple things about the role of the organizing of the environment. And I want to start with classroom environment. If we want kids to pay attention to what's happening in the classroom, especially if the adult is talking, we want to think about how much the environment is visually distracting. I've already talked about that. Is there too much stimulus for kids to focus? And what it is that we really want them to focus on. So we talk about the importance of anchor charts, right? And they are important, but if the world is smeared or your classroom is smeared with anchor charts, how do kids find the information that you want them to be able to use to do their work? The other thing I'll talk about is classroom rules that are actionable. Sometimes we say, be safe, be kind, be respectful, but what does that mean to a young child? So making sure that we're really clear about what we mean, what those behaviors look like. This is really important for all children, especially for children who are dual language learners. So the other thing are the daily schedule, linear calendar, and who chooses or who goes first, and activity management. So I think this is really important, right? A big daily schedule that is reviewed frequently, especially at the beginning of the school year, but actually throughout the school year, so that children know the order of what's going to be happening and what's going to be happening next. Lisa Hunter, do you recognize that slide on the right? That actually came from your classroom many years ago. I think the importance of daily schedule and reviewing the schedule to reduce anxiety so that kids can predict and plan is huge. I was sharing with my colleagues earlier that yesterday I was in a kindergarten classroom with a child who just came from the Ukraine, and he'd been in school for 2 weeks. He does have some English phrases. His English is very limited. I will tell you, for the half an hour that I was in the classroom, he went to the daily schedule several times because he really needed to understand what was going to be happening next. Now, I will also share that he was very excited about play and lunch, but nonetheless, that notion of that. So you will also see kids with anxiety often wanting to review the daily schedule and sometimes get disrupted when if there's a change in the schedule. So one of the things we really want to work with kids on is this notion of schedule and change in schedule. So it's about that cognitive flexibility. The second strategy that we use is a linear calendar. This often tends to be the one that is the most challenging for teachers to adapt their behavior to in kindergarten and first grade. But I would say that the importance of a linear calendar is about predicting and planning. You know, as a teacher, I used to put up like whatever the day it was, and I would slip the number into a matrix calendar, and then we would count up to that date. But what that didn't afford kids an opportunity to do is be able to, number one, predict and plan. So you'll see up at the top, there are home days and school days, the days of the week, and then down below were special events. So one of the things that I have heard in my debriefs always is the skeptical teachers who have tried this strategy with the kids and have seen the result of this, not only in terms of predicting and planning, but also the independent math language that children use as they talk about how many days until it's a home day, how many days until it's an early release day, how many days until it's Halloween. So kids are independently taking their responsibility to really have a conversation about the linear calendar. This is a huge one, and this is who chooses first, right? And so it can be used for many things. People use it for line order, helper of the day. We use it for play choices, and that is just a very simple list of the kids in the class. There's a clothespin that has the child's name, and wherever that clothespin is, that child goes first, and then we just go down the list. So it's really important, again, when you think about predicting and planning, but you also understand that you're also going to get a chance at some point to go first. And now you're going to also have to manage your frustration because you're not going to go first. And it's just been interesting to watch children develop their frustration tolerance and their flexibility as the year goes on for those who have that level of difficulty. For me, this is a huge impact strategy that helps children in terms of their executive function and planning and predicting. I'm also going to say it's a huge strategy for letter recognition and name recognition in the classroom. And then combine this with activity management. So what you see here is actually an example of a kindergarten classroom in Milford that says when it's choice time, combined with who chooses first. These are the activities of purposeful play that are available, or intentional play. And then you get to choose which ones based upon the spaces that are available, right? And I just love the sign that the kids wrote about, oh, well, maybe tomorrow. So if I didn't get my first choice, I can have another chance potentially tomorrow. We're managing frustration while we're engaging kids in their agency. So what we know about sustaining attention and engagement, we've talked about a lot of these already, but I do want to just highlight the bottom two, is the instruction planned with inquiry and discovery about sustaining and captivating attention. I think that's really important, that notion of engaging children. And for those of you who have maker spaces or STEAM labs or have intentional play prompts or provocations and learning challenges in your classroom, fantastic, right? I will have to say, and I will let my colleagues address this, I really don't see a lot of behavioral challenges during playful learning times because kids are actively engaged in activities that they have chosen. And then the last one is dopamine, which is that neurotransmitter, which is that enjoyment with risk-taking. So when kids are actively engaged, they're interested, we get all of these amazing benefits. This is work from McCrell, the Mid-Continent Regional Education Laboratory, which is actually where I was fortunate enough to have professional development in this work. but these are the things that if we're really working with kids, we also want to really think about how do we get things into long-term memory. And these are those practices that support getting things from short-term to more long-term memory. I think a powerful statistic is 90% of learning is lost in 30 days. That has to do with all of the information that gets bombarded. So we really have to think about those conditions of learning if we really want to make learning stick, so that kids can remember it, not just store it, but remember it and being able to use it in their working memory as kids are engaged with different learning tasks in the classroom. So I now want to sort of transition from the importance of executive function, what we know about learning and the importance of active engagement in learning, and talk about a false dichotomy. I sometimes hear people talk about how we don't have time for play because we really have to focus on academics. And I believe that's a false dichotomy. If we really understand what playful learning is, and we understand the components of learning that have kids be interested, engaged, and willing to learn, and then retain the information, it really is through playful learning. So what playful, I'm going to just say this, we've had, my colleagues and I have had conversations about what do we call this? We call it purposeful play, intentional play, guided discovery, playful learning. Please call it whatever resonates in your district or in your early childhood programs. It matters not what you call it. It matters what it is that the children are doing and what it is that you set up for the kids. But what it is not is indoor recess. And what it is not is a release at the end of the day because children have worked so hard. Purposeful play, playful learning is incorporated into your daily schedule. I'll have my colleagues talk about that. But it is about, if we believe in the importance of active engagement and learning, where does it make most sense in the day where children have the strongest attention and skills in their well. So we also understand that when we integrate content, that allows us to really engage kids in broader application, which leads to the opportunity to engage the brain with long-term memory. So we have some research that indicates that children educated in play-based environments are stronger problem solvers, more flexible thinkers, and are better at collaboration. There's actually some work that is done by the American Academy of Pediatrics about the importance of play for kids and their development, health-wise, as well as cognitively learning-wise. This is some work from the Lego Foundation, and again, I have the citation here. They have a lot of interesting and important papers around the importance of playful learning, including one about how we can reduce the achievement gap and about equity in by engaging kids in play. And if you look at the components that the Lego Foundation has described, it so resonates with what we know about the brain research and engaging kids in learning. I also just have this up as a, again, for those of you who are interested, the Harvard Graduate School of Education Project Zero, also funded by the Lego Foundation, has a component that's called the Pedagogy of Play. And so I just think this is a really important resource. And to the right, I just share with you something from a Dutch school. That's actually an international baccalaureate academy that talks about what their indicators are of playful learning. And I think when you look at this, you'll see, again, many of those factors that we talk about the importance of agency and control. So we talk about purposeful play, and we talk about these as important components of purposeful play. We talk about having a challenge, a problem to solve, or provocation using Reggio Emilia terminology. But I think what what it does is that it helps give kids ideas. One of the things that many people have said is that children really don't know how to use materials appropriately. They don't have really great ideas about how to use materials, how to play with each other. So giving a prompt or provocation helps with that. So I just have a couple of slides of prompts or provocations in some of the schools that I have had the actual pleasure of working with. So this is the kids have decided that they were going to recreate the White House using unit blocks. Okay, can I just point out that very busy carpet that just could help not with focusing attention and whole group. But anyway, notice that prompt or provocation and the scale in which they used to recreate the White House. Again, this is using Play-Doh or clay to recreate habitats that they were studying as part of science. And this was an interesting challenge, right? This was about, the teacher gave a prompt or provocation about, if you're going to choose magnet tiles today, I really want you to think about constructing something that might be different than a house or castle or a tower. And this one just knocked my socks off because this was one about making a lollipop. And I just thought that her approach to that idea of doing something different was pretty amazing. What you'll also see is you'll see her play plan. And that's one of the things that we really want to work with kids on as they're engaged in play, which is what's your plan, right? That notion of being able to plan, have an idea, to enact that idea, and then to reflect that idea. And so here are just some other play plans that I thought you might appreciate at the end of the year in kindergarten. As you might get a sense, these children were engaged in what we would call a learning scenario about the veterinarian. So that comes to the second component of playful learning, which is what we would call a learning scenario. And I will certainly let my colleagues talk about what's happening in their schools. There's classrooms and certainly in their district around that. So I want to conclude with a couple of slides that just really reinforce the importance of playful learning and engaging kids actively in that. What we process, we learn. So again, I just want to thank everybody. I wanted just to recap those notion of executive function skills really matter. Kids learn through purposeful play, active engagement and learning, the importance of predicting and planning to reduce anxiety, but also to organize your thinking and your behaviors, and the importance of agency and control, which got taken away from a lot of us, but it really got taken away from children during the pandemic, and the importance of bringing that back. So I really now want to turn it over to my colleagues who have taken the risk to change some practices in their schools and hopefully share with you the rewards for the children in that.
Thank you, EA. You've given us so much to think about this morning already. You're so right when you talk about curriculum standards and expectations that can be accomplished through purposeful learning and play, and agency and choice matter if we want students to take ownership of their learning and develop the lifelong skills of executive functioning that lead to becoming successful and productive citizens. It's now my pleasure to introduce our next segment. As we were planning this convening, we wanted to demonstrate and model a high-quality early childhood program that captures and exemplifies the research-based knowledge, pedagogical skills, and dispositions that EA just spoke about in her presentation. It's one thing to hear about such a program, but another to see it in action. I was fortunate to get to tag along with Christy Kaminsky, one of our CAS video photographers and digital editors, to walk through the kindergarten classroom at Oswegatchie Elementary School on a virtual field trip on May 3rd, 2022. What you're about to see is a typical morning in kindergarten classrooms with students actively engaged in authentic real-world scenario learning experiences. In one classroom, you'll see a flower shop scenario, and in another classroom, not quite as prominent in the video, is a veterinary clinic scenario. What you don't see in the veterinary clinic scenario is that the students had looked at pictures earlier in the morning and learned about stethoscopes. And then they used some of the classroom materials to make their own stethoscopes and use it during play. Likewise, not quite as obvious unless you look closely, you will see that students have made their own signs, posters, and flowers for the flower shop scenario. As you watch the virtual field trip of these student-centered kindergarten classrooms, see how many examples you can find that demonstrate the points that EA made in her presentation, such as skills of executive functioning and self-regulation, play that is aligned with curricular standards, students who are taking ownership of their learning while practicing agency, self-control, and skills of collaboration. It's now my pleasure to introduce you to Principal Joe Macrino, who has graciously opened his school to us to share the work he and his faculty are doing at Oswegatchie Elementary School in Waterford, Connecticut. I know you're going to enjoy this virtual field trip as much as I did when I was there. This video is recorded and will be posted on our websites so that you can view it and this actual convening again and again, and share with your colleagues and other educational stakeholders as an exemplary model of high quality, authentic, and purposeful student-centered learning. Welcome to Oswegatchie Elementary School in Waterford, Connecticut. And now here's Principal Joe Macrino.
Hi everybody, I'm Joe Macrino. I'm the principal of Oswegatchie School in Waterford, Connecticut. And today we're going to give you a virtual field trip into our kindergarten classrooms so you can see the great work our staff is doing with executive function skills and purposeful play.
Ow. Ow. Yeah, there's a no there. W. House. And an S. Good. And an N. We have to read the whole thing. Ready? I will work at the greenhouse. That's my job.
When it comes to the work that we're doing with executive function skills and purposeful play, I believe we're being proactive and reactive. Proactive in that the brain research and common sense tells us that students learn best when they're engaged and that they enjoy the content that they're going into. We're being reactive in that we've seen the effects of COVID and isolation on our students. We're really working on getting kids back together and giving them the skills, the social emotional skills and the academic behaviors to be able to play and to be able to participate as learners in a community.
We know that young children learn best through play. That has been studied time and time again.
Purposeful play is using students' interests driven for them to be able to play out their thinking and their learning. So social emotional, getting to learn to play with peers, getting along with peers.
My job is to really just prepare the environment for them, and the environment is really the other teacher in the classroom. So we follow the children's interests and their lead, and we put out materials that are meaningful to them or things that they're going to be motivated by.
His head is okay. Let me check. His shell is beating fast.
We're in the midst of doing a play scenario. We have created a flower shop in our classroom, and this was really based on interests from the students. We have a garden at our school, and it just recently gotten some ducks. So the kids were very interested and curious about the garden, so we decided that we wanted to create our own garden in our classroom. So we planted our own seeds, and we talked about what would happen when those seeds came to fruition. You know, where would we take these seeds? You know, if they were vegetables, they would go to the market. If they were flowers, they'd go to the flower shop. So then it kind of led us into the flower shop and studying about flowers and what they need to grow and those kinds of things.
And for us, that means we have to have some organization. For example, we have a color coding system where the children wear badges so that they know what their plan was. They know where they're going to be working in the classroom. We know where they're working. We can see that they followed through with their plan. We have to have materials ready for them.
The kiddos have come up with roles. So we have customers, we have flower shop workers, we've made a delivery truck. The delivery person goes to the greenhouse and picks up the flowers.
Let's try some new clothes, guys. But you had to go quick. We already have
I know the curriculum that I have to teach, so how can I incorporate that into what their interests are, because they're much more motivated and driven to learn that way.
This is new to all of us, and I think to somebody who has not been in the professional development, it may just look like kids playing. But if you peel back that layer, you'll see a highly rigorous academic environment.
We have our cash register, so they're doing a lot of math, they're writing receipts, they're counting money and change back to one another. In their literacy component, they're doing their play plans, and we're talking about capital letters and ending marks and spaces and sight words.
As we continue this, I try to include the grade level above. In the past, we've always looked up at the upper grades to try to emulate what they're doing up there to prepare our students. What we're doing now is we're pivoting and we're looking down at the early childhood experiences and try to pull them up because we know that they're working. Just because we only go up to 5th grade here, that doesn't mean our 5th graders are adults. They're still children, and we need to embrace that. In purposeful play and play-based activities, it benefits all. So we're going to continue as the years go on. Those ripples are going to go up. Next year, I really want to start investigating what we can do at the 1st grade level to carry those skills up.
It doesn't have to be an added thing to your curriculum to do, that it can be embedded in your whole day, and I think it's a very powerful way for the kiddos to be learning.
This work is going to be more meaningful for them in the long run. They're problem solving, they're working together, they're going to be productive members of the community and of society.
So there's no finish line with this work. And every teacher and every administrator is at a different point on a continuum when embedding this type of work. But on your journey, feel free to stop by here anytime. We have an open door for educators so we can share the work that we're doing and so that we can learn from your school as well. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, CAS-CIAC Elementary School. We're now going to shift into the panel portion of our session. We're pleased to have outstanding school leaders and practitioners with us today, and I'd like to note that many of our panelists are graduates of the UConn Pre-K to Grade 3 Leadership Program. So please join me in welcoming Liz Gaffney. Liz is currently the coordinator of early learning programs for Milford Public Schools, overseeing the implementation of intentional play in preschool and kindergarten. And prior to working in Milford, Liz was the director of Head Start for New Haven Public Schools. She's also served as a primary instructional coach in New Britain and a head teacher in New Haven. She's a graduate of the UConn Pre-K3 Leaders Program. Also, welcome Dr. Amy Fedigan, who has served as the Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning in Milford Public Schools since August of 2018. Dr. Fedigan first began her professional journey in the middle school world language classroom after earning her Bachelor of Arts degree in Spanish and secondary education from St. Michael's College in Colchester, Vermont. She was named a National Board Certified Teacher, Early Adolescence through Young Adulthood in World Language in 2004. She completed her Master of Science degree in Special Ed with a concentration in Behavioral Studies and a 6-year degree in Educational Leadership, both from Southern Connecticut State. She served as an assistant principal of East Shore Middle School and then the principal of Calf Penn Elementary School, both in Milford, and earned her doctoral degree in Educational Leadership from Southern Connecticut. Dr. Fedigan has participated in the Yale Seedlings Institute for Social and Emotional Learning in the field of education. Additionally, she participated in the UConn NEAG School of Education Pre-K3 Leadership Program and found the experience to be relevant and inspiring for leading this critical work. We also welcome Lisa Hunter. Lisa has been an educator at the primary level for over 15 years and has been a principal at Hazardville Memorial School in Enfield for the past 5 years. Her last 4 years in the classroom were spent in kindergarten, where she began her journey with executive function and purposeful play through the guidance of E.A. Aschenbrenner. Lisa's passionate about work and is committed to moving it forward. She lives in South Windsor with her husband, Brian. She has 2 daughters, Caitlin and Nicole, who are currently attending Emmanuel College in Boston. And Joe Macrino. Joe is in his 4th year as principal of CAS-CIAC Elementary School in Waterford. While assistant principal at the Lewin G. Joel School in Clinton, he was named the 2018 CAS Elementary School Principal of the Year. In 2017, he completed the Pre-K3 Leadership Program through the NEAG School of Education at UConn. This experience had a significant impact on how he views his role as an elementary principal and advocate for early childhood education. Asawagachi School is now in its third year partnering with EastCon to provide high quality coaching to pre-K and kindergarten teachers focused on executive functioning and purposeful play. And Christine Mizullo, she is in her 19th year of teaching with 13 years in the kindergarten classroom. Her first years in kindergarten were in a private developmental kindergarten that focused on purposeful play. This is her 6th year teaching kindergarten at Hazardville Memorial School in Enfield, where she promotes and implements the development of executive function skills through play scenarios. With the guidance of E.A. Aschenbrenner, she has held professional development sessions and created a video encouraging colleagues to also implement purposeful play into their curriculum. She's worked closely with Enfield's Early Childhood Collaborative, Key Initiatives to Early Education, KITE, to help families experience a smooth transition to kindergarten. She graduated with her BS and MS in education from Central and resides in Glastonbury with her husband, Joe, where they raised their 3 now adult children. So I'm going to turn it over to our moderator for our panel, E.A. Aschenbrenner, and welcome everyone.
Great. So actually, that was such a great video, and it really highlighted so many of the components that we're talking about in supporting executive function and purposeful play. So what I'd like to do is actually start with Joe, and as a follow-up to the virtual field trip that we saw of 2 of your classrooms.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for your time. I am excited and caffeinated, so I'm going to consider my inhibitory control. So I've limited myself just to about 3 slides, just to get our feet in the pool. Do not be overwhelmed. Obviously, if you're here, you realize the importance of this work, but it can seem overwhelming when we have so many other initiatives on our plate, that teachers especially have so many initiatives on their plate. But as has been said over and over again, this is not an additional thing. This is, if you do it right, it can be baked in. It's the intention which will lead to great impact. So let me just show you something real quick, just to describe our journey here in Waterford. So here's just a brief chronology of what we've done. Back in the school year of 1920, we started the work. And that is just, we contracted with EastCon, with Melanie Smith-Cervera, with the help of EA, and we started to have conversations. Why is this important work? So we got into the research, we got into brain development, we got into studies, and we started to have these conversations, and we shared it out with all of our staff, just so everybody had a taste of what would be going on. There was a lot of classroom observations. It was introducing some new resources into the classroom. And really, it was, as an administrator, I hate to use this terminology, but I feel that teachers need to hear this as well from an administrator. You have permission to pursue this work. If I go into your classroom and I see play, I'm going to applaud. I'm not going to say, why aren't you doing foundations right now? So it's that give and take. So then we got deeper into the work in 2020 and 2021, despite the situation that we were in. COVID had significant impact on how we could run a school and how many kids we can have in a group, but the adult learning still had to happen because we couldn't lose momentum. So what we really did, and this was almost like a magic switch for us, is that we started to include our literacy coaches and our math coaches into these conversations. We had Melanie as our executive function and purposeful play coach, now meeting with the staff and the coaches, so we could talk about, all right, so how do we show that this is working? For the people that are just looking in briefly and saying, this is cute, this is a nice little activity you're doing, where's the learning? We had to bring the standards to the forefront and say, this is how we're doing it. Here's the quantitative and the qualitative data showing you that what we're doing is making impact and that there is great intention and planning behind the work that we're doing. We enter this year, the kids are back full force, and now we're making it the norm. This is the expectation on your schedule. Show me where this work is taking place. Once again, including the literacy coaches in pause and plan time. Okay, Melanie, our coach, is coming. Let's get set up. Coaches, I'm going to need you on hand. Here's the documents. Here's the non-negotiables that we're all going to be talking about. Let's keep this work going. And what we realized is everybody is on a continuum. So at first, the 1920 year, we had one pre-K teacher, one K teacher, and then we expanded it the next year, and we expanded it the next year. So we have to tend every flower in that garden to make sure that we're addressing all adult needs as we move forward. So we're a work in progress. I'm very proud that we got to share the work that my staff is currently implementing and the great learning that the kids are demonstrating. But let me just give you the real picture of it, okay? So most of this happens between 9 and 9:45. Although I would love to see play all day, right now, this is where we are. And we're happy with this right now, but we're always going to push ourselves. So you come into the classroom between 9 and 9:45. And outside of the video, we're going to pull the curtain back a little bit. So the beginning of the lesson, the teacher's reviewing the purpose, the content, and the schedule for the day, and the schedule for play, and presenting the new content. So there is direct whole group instruction in the beginning. Boys and girls, remember today we're focusing on the flower shop. Here's the roles that we established. Remember when we had our visitor from the flower shop, the florist that came in as he or she described the work. So there's that direct teaching. Now internally and in their notes, the teachers are referencing standards. They do have a one sheet of the standards they know they want to hit. Some teachers need that right now. They need that physical checking it off so they know that they are covering everything they need to. And in that video, you may have caught many things: the phonics, the spelling, the letter formation, sentence structure. While they're interacting with kids, so during that time, our students are play planning, which is essential to kicking off that period of play. That's where the proof comes from. At the end of the year, if you need to do a board presentation and they ask that difficult question, once again, well, it looks great, but prove that they're learning, prove that down the road, their scores are going to improve, and all that accountability on our end as educators. Look at a play plan from the first month of kindergarten and compare it to a play plan at the end of the kindergarten year. And there you go. There's your receipt. That's just one very impactful way to show that there is learning going on. Now, as they're playing, teachers are referencing the standards, they're facilitating play, they're asking questions, and they're recording progress while the kids are playing. So they're part of that as well. They are facilitating. They are not directing kids how to play or what path to take. They are asking those questions. You become masterful at being a question asker. And then at the end, everybody reflects. How did it go today? What's going to be different tomorrow? I'm talking about, standards, but I'm also talking about those social emotional interactions. They coexist. And then the communicating with parents, that always comes up when we do any sorts of presentations. Seesaw has been our greatest advocate. We show the parents and the families what is going on in video to see their child speaking, playing, helping them, the parents recognize where in the continuum of play their child is. It really helps them out. And here's just some pictures of making choices and planning play. I don't know about you, but I'm sure I have some kindred spirits here who are going through some similar experiences right now. Right now, we are in the midst of our annuals and triennials and the PPT marathon that we're all in. And we keep on hearing it over and over again, probably in 90% of the PPTs. I'm worried about my child's socialization. I'm worried about their language skills. I feel that they're disengaged. I can't get them to focus. For me, this is the prescription. This is a huge vehicle to push those kids in a direction where they and their parents feel successful and the teachers feel successful. Kids have been away from each other for a long time. This is how we address their needs in an environment that they love and that the teachers love. I mean, we are kids. We just creak a little bit more when we get up from the play center and we have to pay taxes. But this is an enjoyable way to be an educator, especially during these very trying times. I want to share one more thing with you so you can see what the teachers are doing in action. I'm going to pull up a daily schedule for you. This is always a big ask. So how do you bake this into the daily schedule? Give me 1 second here. So here is a basic daily schedule that will show you how we are getting this in and doing it well. So here you go. This is a kindergarten schedule at my school. Just point out the big things. We have our arrivals, you know, and the lunch count and all that, morning greeting, and then we jump into the good stuff. We give ourselves about 45 minutes. That gives enough time for the adults to do their thing, for the kids to do their thing, and being mindful that even though it's play, they're going to need a break and transition as well. We kind of get them, you know, sometimes, we'll be honest, it can be hard to pull them out of these play scenarios, which is okay. But we do need that little bit of a buffer to get them out of that. And we go into story time. And then you have, you know, your, I would call typical, your standard kindergarten experiences with foundations and workshop. And then your specials and all that. So yes, that very distinct playtime happens between 9 and 9:45. But I assure you, as your staff or as you become more comfortable and experienced with this, this bleeds out into everything, and you will have a very different perspective as an educator. And when you start pursuing this work, I'll tell you, as a parent, my son Elvis is now in 6th grade and my daughter Coral is in 3rd grade. It significantly changes how you parent as well. When you start considering that, I said it in the video, and I'm going to say this till they bury me. These are still kids. If you work in an elementary school, never forget you are always working with children. And I would advocate, I would call myself, I was pretty much a child all the way up until I was about 27. And if you ask my wife, I still can be very childish. So this always helps to be in an environment, to focus on your executive function skills, and to make this the norm in your school. Thank you.
Joe, I want to thank you for your commitment to doing things differently for children in your school and in your district. Certainly your passion comes out tremendously, and I really so much appreciate that. What I think I'm going to do is introduce Lisa and Christine and have them talk about what's happening at their school, and then a district perspective from Amy Fettigan and Liz Gaffney, and then we'll do, I'll ask the panel some questions, and then we'll take questions from the group. Lisa, Christine, my pleasure.
Hey, everybody. Okay, let me just share my screen. Yes, I'm good. Yeah. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Yes. Yeah, okay. Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm going to speak to first about my experience as a kindergarten teacher doing this work. So my work with executive function and purposeful play began back in 2013 as a kindergarten teacher. When I started working with EA, I had probably a few of the most challenging behaviors that I had ever had in my career. So as a teacher, I felt like it was an aha moment that lasted the entire year for me. The work truly transformed my teaching from that point forward. And like EA said, executive function really, really matters. I found that out. I was all in, and after living through the year of implementing executive function strategies, I saw results. I have finally had a toolbox. Routines were consistent and predictable. Learning was engaging. Students love the play scenarios, and overall, students had fun while learning on a daily basis, and I had fun. And over all of that, I felt like behavior improved over time. So I know EA talked about these strategies in her presentation, and really these were embedded into my daily instruction So, you know, we talk about practicing the executive function skills. Some things were done on a daily basis. Some were done a couple times a week. I'm going to show you a little more of that now. So visual mediators for me, I felt like were huge. It helped students. When we think about our most needy students, many things are out of their control. I found these proactive strategies guaranteed a predictable school day for all students. I found that being intentional about the choices was really important in the success of the kids' day. So these are a few, the daily schedule, and I'm going to show you a graphic next. Linear calendar, who chooses first, line order, star of week, whatever you call it, and message of the day. So this is a picture in Christine's room. And these things all help to predict, plan, and organize thoughts. So the daily schedule, EA showed that my schedule from a long time ago. That was part of how we started our day. We talked about the schedule as a group. And then we turned the schedule over as time went on so kids could see where they were throughout the day. Those kids that were ready to go home after lunch for the first part of the year saw, you know, what was coming. And we really tried to make the schedule to help them sustain that schedule throughout the day with fun activities and learning. Yes.
Okay, so I just want you to all take a look at my morning message board that's up there. And I remember at the beginning of this program, EA saying, you know, sometimes there's a little too much busyness around the room for the children. And if you look at how busy my board is, you have to remember that this is now May, and we started the board back in September. So you start by adding one piece at a time, and your morning message is very, very simple. That first week of school, we're down to adding in sort of our writer's workshop topics into our morning message, where we're adding the story into our diagrams and then really elaborating on our sentence. And I don't know if you can see my schedule over there on the right-hand side. When Joe was talking and showing his schedule, you can see where mine starts off differently, that I don't have play first thing in the morning, but I have play right before lunch, which gives me that morning time to focus on some academics and actually center time. So the morning is all fun according to the children, but it also gives us that smooth transition from cleaning up play centers into lunch, which is also something that they're looking forward to. So like EA had said, having play in the morning really is a great time because you get them focused and ready to work and excited to work. And you can really add in more academics in quotes into that organized play.
Thanks. So the visual mediators really help to build that independence. Students can see them, right? They can be viewed from all over the room, and they can see where they are in their day. They can see where they may be going for a center. They can see on the linear calendar what might be coming, when a home day is coming or a special event's coming. It also helps to facilitate the routines. So, you know, I felt like all I had to do was point in a certain area and students could navigate that and know what was going on without me having to tell them. It provides consistency for kids. It supports our executive function development. And it also served as a proactive behavior strategy because kids knew what to expect. I found that a lot of times we could talk somebody off of a meltdown or out of a meltdown, maybe when it came to who chooses first and then wanting to be first. But then knowing that today might not be your day, but in 2 days, or you could see when that time was coming. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Christine to talk to you about purposeful play.
All right, so you can see, you know, the famous quote by Mr. Rogers about play being the work of children. And you can see up here, there are 4 pictures of some purposeful play time, which is blended into my academic time. So in the first upper left corner, the children are actually doing research getting ready for our weather scenario. So they're working together as a team, and they feel like they're playing because they're off in a separate part of the room. They're using the books that they love, and they're doing their research to get ready to set up that scenario. At the bottom, this is during the winter, we go outside all the time, doesn't matter. Well, if it's too cold, we can't, but I would. We were outside doing skip counting, making snowballs and counting by 2. So this was our math time for the day. They got to go outside and play and use snowballs, and then they got to throw them afterwards, which was fantastic. And if you can see over on the far right corner, that is actually a time working with teen numbers, where we're using number lines, and they needed to build towers making teens. And once they were done making their towers, they could then create whatever they wanted out of their Unifix cube. So we're practicing our teen numbers and playing at the same time. And then up at the top, there's another one that's playing with pictures and sorting and using those literacy skills up there in the corner. So they're playing while they're learning and practicing. And oh, this is our favorite. Here's how we incorporate Legos into our day. These are our Lego builds. And these are what EA had talked about being provocations or challenges. And you can see the 2 boys on the left were building a shelter to keep their 2 stuffies dry. Now, this is part of our science curriculum. So I'm now embedding part of that, that challenge into the science curriculum. They're living it, and they're using those Legos to build a shelter to keep them dry. And if you could see the video as I was watching it, but I didn't show the video on it, the boys were discussing that this shelter could only keep them dry, that it could not protect them from the wind because the foundation wasn't strong enough. And so in order for them to create a wind-proof shelter, they were going to need to change their foundation with the Legos. And so that was such a great learning moment for them. On the other side, you can see the girls, they're working with our emotion Lego kits. And this is part of our SEL curriculum. So they're playing again with the Legos and discussing how to change your emotion from being sad or angry to being happy. Because what is great about these the emotion Legos, is they have different faces on each side. And so the children were able to make 1 or 2 different characters, and then they would role play being angry or being sad, and they could immediately finish the role play and change their emoji character to a happy. So again, playing during our SEL time. And then here we go, we have more Legos. And this is part of science and social studies. If you take a look at the boy that's laying down on the ground, this was his model of an airport. And inside that shelter, the square shelter in the middle, was the bunker where the airplanes were stored, and they would take off from the top. And then on the bottom is our science, and that is nope, that's actually still community. That's part of the community where they had to build something, a place in the community where you can see there are community members and what they did. So they had to describe their space, and then they had to describe what the workers did in their space and how they were helpful in the community. And then up at the top right corner, we have a child, when we were talking about then and now, part of our history of social studies, we were talking about pilgrims and Thanksgiving and coming over on the Mayflower. And they had to build a model boat or ship that would bring as many people from another country to here and bring them over safely. And so they needed to have a space where they could stay dry and safe, where maybe they wouldn't get sick. And then they needed to have a space where they could sleep and a space where they could come out and view the fresh air and navigate where they were going. So that one was a really great creation up in the far right corner, doing our challenge. So again, we're embedding those Legos into the curriculum, and they were playing and telling me all they knew about it. Going right on.
So yeah, so play plans. So these are some examples from Christine's students. And as you can see, Mikey's on the left was something from the beginning of the year. And this is an example of something that he recently wrote. You know, we see with our play plans, I mean, you see all of the all the skills that kids are using and applying through this work and using their writing standards. And I think we also find that kids, writing's hard, right? Writing's hard for kids. And I think kids feel that confidence in these play plans, and they have that anchor, and they really get used to developing and writing about it with more details in their plans. And that's
And another way that I feel like it's embedded into our curriculum is, we all have our curriculum that we're required to focus on and teach the mini lessons to, but we can incorporate these play plans into those mini lessons. We say, okay, here's what we're learning about, making sure we have uppercase letters at the beginning of a sentence, making sure there are spaces between our words. We're sounding out our words to write CVC words. When you go into your play plan time, make sure you're using those strategies that you learned. And you can see for my child on the right, this is now May, and he is following along and doing fabulous with writing and hitting those standards. So this is one of my lower students academically. I put fingers in quotes academically because I don't like to use that term. But if you look, along the spectrum of where my kids are, this was a child that came in, as you can see, drawing potatoes with scribbles. And now it is May, and he's able to tell me what he's doing, where he's going, and what he's going to do. So, for him, this is just an amazing play plan. You can use these play plans to really monitor the progress of their writing skills.
And so this is just one of, I know the virtual field trip did a fabulous job of really capturing that.
Oh, it's going on its own.
Oops. Oh boy. All right, let's hopefully that's it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but this was in my classroom, my absolute favorite. And honestly, kids, every student, every single one of my students, regardless of ability, they participated and had a role in this. And as you can see, at this point, this evolved into a whole classroom scenario, which takes a lot of, it's baby steps, like Joe said. It started with one part of the center being a scenario, but this just eventually evolved because the interest and excitement was there. So it makes me smile, and these kids are old now. So, and so this was actually the reception. Oh boy. Well, that was a receptionist. So we had a check-in and check-out. They had to pay the vet bill, which is actually, if it was today, it'd be a lot more expensive than it was then. And this was our waiting area. So the kids would actually come in with their pets. They were the pet owners waiting in the waiting area, checking in with the receptionist, and then actually navigating the scenario.
The standards, how all of this fits the standards.
Good.
So we were, thinking back to the standards, and there are teachers out there that are saying, but again, how do I make sure I'm hitting those standards? How do I make sure? And if you really take a step back and watch what the children are doing, and like Joe said, they have a checklist. You're hitting all those standards. You are hitting the writing standards, the reading standards, the language standards. You're hitting them all. Listening and speaking, and they're playing, hitting the standards they need to.
And so the last slide that keeps popping up for some reason. So as a building principal, the things that I think are important, scheduling is always, it's the hardest, probably one of the hardest parts of our job is to create building schedules for staff. But I worked with Christine closely and gave her that flexibility in her schedule. How many times did you switch it this year to get it?
At least 7 or 8 times.
So since the beginning of the year, she kept tweaking and saying, is it okay if I move this to make this feel better for kids? And I said, yes. And if you could take some time and spend some minutes in her classroom, it's a fabulous place where kids are learning and excited and challenged. So another thing that we were able to implement.
Don't be afraid to change the scheduling. either. I know often as a teacher, you're afraid to say, let me move it, let me change, you know, students are already used to it, but don't be afraid to change it. They'll acclimate.
Yeah, I mean, I think the shifts that you made, your schedule is probably where you'll begin
next
year. Community building time, we tried something new this year where our first transition doesn't happen until the first hour into our days, which for us behaviorally made a big difference, because kids, our littlest learners weren't shifting and heading out somewhere first thing in the morning. So that worked. And again, just supporting what feels best for kids, encouraging proactive and positive behavior management, and being flexible. So what the data shows, I mean, globally, let's talk about how your kids are doing this year.
Yeah, so, you know, data kind of runs a lot of our programs here, and we hate to say it, we hate to always be looking at the data, but it's what we have to do. And we are I want to use the word floored. We're floored by the progress behaviorally and again, academically that my students have made this year. I don't know if Lisa has the slide in there, that I have a child that was receiving many behavior discipline notes at the beginning of the year and is now down to none. And I think the biggest impact of it is that I have really used all of the executive function strategies that I have learned from EA, and I have made play a priority in my classroom. And it's just evident when you walk in the room, the difference in the behavior of the students.
And so this is just our last slide, just to show something. So we're a PBIS school. This is our year 5. So we do input our behavior referrals into Swiss. And so this was Christine's room at the beginning of the year. I had a total of all year 46 referrals, and it was 5 students that were receiving referrals. But over time, as you can see, I mean, her students are doing extremely well all the way around globally, academically, socially. And so again, like I had said, my experience in my own kindergarten classroom, I mean, it works, and it generally, like I said, it changed my practice. So I'm really excited that we have so many people on this webinar today. And that's it for us.
I want to say thank you to Lisa and Christine. When you sort of put this work in the timeline, Lisa, I have to be honest, I was seeing those pictures of the vet in your classroom, and it just brought back these memories of the problem solving. Do you remember this?
Yes,
the problem solving and the challenges that children were working through in a very proactive way. And so, you know, I just so much appreciate your having done this as a kindergarten teacher, seeing the value of this, the passion, and now as a building administrator, really wanting to support that in your school. As I said, I've been writing down notes. I'm going to ask the questions to the panel as a group, but really excited to introduce 2 of my colleagues and friends, Dr. Amy Fettigan and Liz Gaffney from Milford Public Schools, who started on this journey. We got a little bit disrupted because of the pandemic and instruction, but I am just so excited about the way that you have looked at purposeful play and executive function from the constructs and the frameworks of instruction and learning in your district. So, Dr. Fettigan, Liz, please.
Thank you, EA. Liz and I are so excited to be included in this dialogue today, and we're really grateful for the opportunity to learn from our colleagues across the state. We've been saying, as we're sitting next to each other now, we need to get in contact with, we need to ask if we can borrow. So we'll be looking forward to being in touch with our colleagues who've shared today to share in this good practice as we move forward in the weeks ahead. So we're going to share our screen. Hopefully everybody can see it. So again, Amy Fettigan, Assistant Superintendent of Milford Public Schools, and Liz Gaffney, my colleague, she is our coordinator for early childhood programs. And we're excited to talk with you today about how we're approaching this work from the lens of our school system. We have 8 elementary schools in Milford, And we're really we started with a small scale implementation and we're moving toward a more full scale model. And we'd like to share with you our journey about how we got to where we are today and where we're going next. So we're going to start with really sharing with you how we're moving toward a systemic approach, how we're really linking the concept of intentional play to our district model for high quality instruction. And Liz is going to give some very specific and concrete examples of how we're bringing this to life in our classrooms. Whenever we're working on something that we believe deeply in, it's not just enough, I guess, in district work to share what our belief is, but we always want to root beyond our why in instructional research and best practice that we know to be happening, in this country and beyond. So we always are looking to share with our colleagues and our other stakeholders, what does the research say that really is going to back up foundationally what we believe our why is. And so we were able to share with our colleagues some information from Harvard University on the Center of Developing Child. Actually, I think EA shared this research with us, and we're ever grateful for her support in our district and what she does to bring us along in this work and to be a wonderful teacher to us. So in district, we started with the why. We were sharing with our building administrators, instructional supervisors in the central office, certainly our teaching staff, families, and the greater community. And we did a lot of work actually sharing also with our Board of Education to let them know the why of the work and what the research is saying. Everybody, I'm sure in this panel and that's dialing in today knows that the research is very clear on the developing brain and the early childhood experiences that children have that should be the foundation for their college and career readiness and for the dreams that they and their families have for them, for their future selves. We also know that the research is very clear that when children have these strong experiences in childhood, not only are they better prepared for their future, and they're better prepared to be productive and engage as a member of the workforce, but they can have healthier lives, which is certainly something that's important to all of us as parents and educators. One of the things that we did in district was we engaged in a district study. And actually, EA Aschenbrenner was a facilitator of that district study. And we're very grateful for her work in that area with us as a school system, because we knew we had 8 elementary schools. We had a very supportive Board of Education, but we had many different types of early childhood programs in our system. You can see a few examples here. We have integrated pre-K, Ready to Learn program. We have a child care lab at one of our high schools where our high school students are able to pursue a career pathway in early childhood. We've got pre-K-5, self-contained partnership with our PPS department, primary development, and supported K. And one of the things that we knew is, while we're grateful to have all of these programs and the variability in what we can offer to our community, we were kind of all over the place. We didn't have a very coherent approach and systemic approach to how we were offering early childhood programs. And we knew we wanted to strengthen early childhood programs for every learner in Milford Public Schools so that they have a strong start. So the purpose of our study was really to engage in a review of our current practices. And we were seeking recommendations to incorporate intentional play and executive function at scale at some point across our 8 elementary schools. So during that district study, we really engaged in interviews, focus groups, we conducted wide observations, surveys, and we also engaged in a curriculum and assessment review. This district study resulted in several commendations for us as a school system that we were really happy to read. We knew that we were to be commended that we were investigating ways to increase engagement for our youngest learners. We have a very strong model for high quality instruction that is really the key lever to improve teaching and learning across our school system. And we're very blessed to have instructional supervisors, super fortunate to have Liz Gaffney to focus in this area of work. We are very lucky to have coaches and very willing teachers who believe in intentional play. Another commendation was the community support. We have a very supportive Board of Education who is cheering us on along the way. They believe very deeply in the importance of this work. And throughout our system, there is already an understanding that executive function skills are recognized as critical for social and future academic success. We also simultaneously had been expanding our world language program in the primary grades. So that was seen as accommodation. We received several recommendations that will be instructive in improving our work and efforts to strengthen early childhood programs moving forward. And we organized those into a few buckets. The first bucket from a school system perspective with our 8 elementary schools was around building coherence. And we were not surprised to see this recommendation. It was one of our aims actually in the beginning of this journey. We knew we had a little bit of, a lot of variability in practice across the 8 elementary schools. So one of the recommendations was to continue to focus on professional learning in the area of high quality instruction, and to understand how intentional play sits within that model for high quality instruction. That really intentional play is a demonstration of high quality instruction for our young learners. And I agree with Joe, his earlier comments, that we've really got to think about how to bring this up and through. I'd love to see this going up through grade 12 actually, and into our professional learning with adult learners. We are working still on developing an understanding of intentional play and developing an infographic in districts. So that's some of our future work. And there is an interest in having some oversight. And so again, we're grateful that Liz is our resident expert in this area. The second recommendation for our team, our teaching and learning department, was to focus on curriculum and professional learning. So we know that in order to move and advance intentional play and executive function in our classrooms to strengthen early childhood programming, we have to look very closely at the curriculum. The curriculum really should outline what? It should outline the assured experiences that our students and our learners are receiving and experiencing, right, as students and learners in Milford Public Schools. And we needed to have a keen eye on the professional learning to support the initiative. The third recommendation was really around schedule, resources, and environment. And we know that in order to strengthen early childhood programs, we need to make sure that we have a schedule that is conducive. I know many of us feel like whether it's an elementary, middle, or high school schedule, or we're trying to fit so much in the school day that has a definitive start and stop time. But thinking intentionally about what you place where within the schedule, I know is something that EA and Liz are always speaking with me about and advocating for, especially in our early childhood settings. So we want to make sure that our educators and our learners, whether they're the adult learners or our little ones, have exactly what they need for a strong early childhood experience in the way of resources, materials, supplies, furniture, etc. I love the earlier comment that the classroom environment, the classroom is the other teacher in the room. So I'm going to use that. Thank you for sharing that before. After we had the district study, we really needed to think as a leadership team, a team of formal leaders, about how to bring together a guiding coalition for this work, right? So you always are thinking about, as from a school system perspective, starting with your why, being able to express to others why this work is critically important, why it really is a non-negotiable for children to experience play and developmentally appropriate and strong experiences in their beginning days as learners in the school system. Creating that sense of urgency is super important. And then thinking about how to build a guiding coalition where you have the kind of coalition of the willing who are ready to learn more and to teach others as they engage together in a collaborative way. We're always, Liz and I, thinking about what our district strategy is, what's happening in each of the 8 schools, what's happening in each of the classrooms of those 8 schools. And then how can we engage our teachers as leaders of this work? So, as a parent of 4 Milford Public School students myself, I can say that it is really the teachers that are leading the efforts of high quality instruction. My kids are older now. I wish I could bring them back into Milford Public Schools primary grades experiences, but what I would say is it's the teachers that are leading this work that have the most direct impact with our kids. So we recognize that, and we are learning from our teachers about how best to implement all of the strategies that are discussed today and that Liz will start to share with us from our district in just a minute. And then thinking about how do we keep our eyes on the prize? How do we sustain the acceleration for this work and institute change? I've mentioned a few times our model for high quality instruction. And so we're happy if, I know there will be questions at the end, we can talk a little bit more about this, and certainly anybody is free to reach out to me and Liz and to inquire about, if interested, how do we really discuss in district how intentional play sits in a model for high quality instruction. Because we have one district model for high quality instruction, preschool through grade 12. Regular ed, special ed, everybody in the district, core classes, the arts, fine arts, everybody in our school system is discussing teaching and learning through this model of high quality instruction. So we work with our staff to make sure that they're creating their own mental model for how intentional play sits within the model for high quality instruction. We would also say that we begin and end with relationships in Milford Public Schools. And we want to make sure that in our early childhood settings, there's a strong focus on relationships among our educators that are working in teams to strengthen early childhood programs, with our students, and certainly with their families and our greater community. And one of the things that I'm, I guess, from a district leader perspective, most enthusiastic about is we are very familiar with graduation requirements and what happens when children are completing as learners their experiences in a public school setting. Many school systems have what are referred to as a portrait of the graduate. In Milford Public Schools, we refer to this as our vision of the learner. And what this should outline is the competencies, the core competencies that are meant to be fostered within a learner's experience as they journey through a school system, preschool through grade 12, so that they're ready, for whatever their future holds, college and career preparedness. And one of the things that Liz and I are always focusing on is how do we bring the vision of the learner to life first in our early learning childhood environments and through strong early childhood experiences. So when we're talking about vision of the learner and graduation requirements in Milford Public Schools and college and career preparedness, we're beginning with our preschool students. And when we say vision of the learner, we are talking about our 3-year-old learners all the way up through the adult learners on staff, including the 2 of us. So we like to really talk about that through line. I'm going to turn it over to Liz now, who's going to give some concrete examples of what this looks like in action.
Hi, so my name is Liz Gaffney, and I'm the coordinator of early learning, and I've been here since March of 2021. And I'd like to share through pictures what we're doing in district right now. As Dr. Fedigan has shared, we started with a small pilot group of 9 K teachers and 9 preschool teachers across the district this year. And now we are expanding to all kindergarten classrooms next year, as well as preschool. So the areas we're going to touch on quickly are executive functioning. And I know you've heard this from the other presenters, but I want to reiterate how important it is for our children to start focusing on executive functioning skills at a young age. It increases their independence, their problem solving, self-control, and making choices, and building memory. So here are some pictures of what's going on in our district. As was shared by our Enfield counterparts, we are utilizing a picture schedule every day and a who chooses first for making choices in the classroom. And one of the great things that I've seen this year is the fact now teachers walk away from running the who chooses first. And in our kindergarten classrooms, the children are actually cycling through on their own because they know when it is their turn and they're holding each other accountable. We also use a color coordinated choice board, which has been a change of practice, and our teachers are really seeing the benefits of it as they see their kids starting to be self-regulated and co-regulating their peers. Here's a picture of one of our classrooms, a kindergarten classroom, in which they were doing a grocery store scenario. And again, the color coordinated choice board and the children using it. Our next area of focus is oral language development. And we all know how important it is for our young learners to work on their oral language skills. Intentional play, as we call it in Milford, allows for us to expand children's vocabulary via building their background knowledge, developing problem-solving strategies, and overall social emotional learning. In this preschool classroom, a teacher kind of took advantage of the fact that a student's aunt had traveled to Antarctica, and they started studying Antarctica and the animals of Antarctica, which turned into a study of different types of boats, and kids were able to build them and do experiments with flotation in the classroom. We do use message of the day every day as an opportunity for us to work on oral language skills, as well as capitalization, ending marks, sentence length of words, and spacing. And obviously, lots of read alouds and sharing of knowledge through literature. And I'm actually like to be transparent. Play plans initially were pushed back in my district, but my teachers in kindergarten have seen the value of play plans. Their kids selecting a center, drawing a picture, and then writing a sentence about it, and then going back to reflect on whether they were able to accomplish their goal for that center. And here are some examples of our play plans. This is a kindergarten classroom. This teacher chooses to do her play plans with 2 children. So they are, whoever's going to the center does their play plans together and they discuss what they want to do. They can have different play plans, or they can collaborate on one plan. And the teachers really love to see the growth that has been made in the play plans throughout the year. Some teachers will do the play plans before lunch, and then the kids refer them when they come back, and then they go play. Some teachers do it immediately before play. Overall, though, the idea that children are really thinking about what they're going to do and following through. More examples. This one is like, we will make a circle track, and the children did make that circle track. And upon reflection, via a gallery walk, the kids shared their circle track. Another area is our scenario development, which I love because it allows kids to only be tethered by their imagination. So they get to be as creative as they want. They are building memory, they're working on background knowledge, you are integrating standards into their learning, and quite honestly, they don't even realize they're learning because they're just playing. In this scenario, the teacher developed a racetrack scenario. She tied it to a STEM unit on pushes and pulls, and from that, the kids made a racetrack, which turned into more of a car dealership as well. There was even a DMV where you had to go to have your license given to you every day. You had to pass a test to get your driver's license. They built their own cars that they could use and drive around the classroom. And the gas pump, which actually started in a grocery store scenario where they had to stop and shop. And then when they transferred over to the cars, they utilized their gas pump again. We are in Milford are very lucky that we have fantastic specialists as well as STEM educators. And what we have done is really started to collaborate with our STEM and specialists. Our teachers are integrating this in the specials, what's going on in the classrooms. And our hope as at one point, specialists will start to be pushing into the classrooms and sharing what they know with our teachers so it can be integrated daily. This is a STEM lab, and these are preschool kids, and they had to build a structure together. They had to be able to hold a dinosaur. And so this was the work between the preschool teacher and the STEM teacher. So right now in Milford, last year we organized a guiding coalition, and it was based on district leadership as well as EA and teachers from across the district. And we came up with a draft vision and shared it with the whole school district and the Board of Education. We had professional learning and intentional play for both district administrators and offering it to the community as well. We had our pilot implementation, as I shared with you. And now our next steps for next year is full implementation with all kindergartens participating, which is really exciting. And I'm so thrilled because those kindergarten teachers who didn't get to participate this year can't wait to be a part of it. We have a professional learning plan that includes all preschool and kindergarten teachers. We are starting to have discussions around the learning schedule. And I love how Joe had his play right at the start of the day. And that's a conversation we're continuing to have here. We are communicating our vision, as Dr. Fedigan had shared, with our Board of Education, who are very supportive, as well as the greater community in Milford. We are updating our kindergarten classroom environment so that it is truly utilized as another teacher. And we are collaborating with our community preschools to share what we're doing in Milford Public Schools so there can be alignment for our children as they enter from the kindergarten years. Okay, so that's what we have going on in Milford. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you. I just can't be more excited about the work that's happening in your schools and in your districts for children and also for teachers. So I want to just actually, Amy and Liz, could you stop your screen share so we can get back to the panel view? There we go. All righty. So I just wanted to make a comment about schedule and then talk about and actually ask some questions and encourage you to put questions in the chat. So one of the things I want to say about the thinking about the flexibility and the challenge of when playful learning happens in your schedule has to do with thinking about how we want kids to have fun, how we want them to come to school and be excited and be enthusiastic learners while we're decreasing anxiety. I just think about remembering my school where we thought it was a really great idea, right? Kids needed to be nourished, so we gave them breakfast and we thought, oh good, we'll go from breakfast to reading groups. And what we found was that we saw an increase in inappropriate behaviors, I'll just say, because really upon reflection, it was too great of a challenge for kids. They were concerned that they weren't going to be successful. And so there was a real shutdown and it was frustration mostly. And we saw that in their behaviors. And now that I've been engaged with this project for so long and really think about the brain and the importance of kids reducing their anxiety so we can get to the prefrontal cortex, the question that I ask all of you is what are those conditions, especially at the beginning of the year, as children enter kindergarten, transition into first grade, and like I'd also say transition up through the grades like my colleagues have mentioned, that are going to make kids want to be enthusiastic, be available, and engage actively and feel successful to take risks. One of the things I think you've seen about playful learning is that there's not one right answer. There might be a prompt or a provocation, and there might be a scenario, but there's not one right answer. And I think that openness with agency and choice really matters and has kids being more open to be conducive to learning throughout the day. So that's just one of my thoughts as I'm putting together the neuroscience with thinking about organizing a schedule, which as an administrator, I'm sure is one of your top nightmares after having dealt with the pandemic. But besides that, I'm just saying, it is huge. Yeah, look at all the laughter and the smiles. Yeah, you know that, right? So one of the things that I just really wonder about, Joe, you mentioned something, and I want to open it up to everybody on the panel. You've mentioned something about really working to not use the word cute and really helping people to understand that what kids are engaged in playful learning, intentional, purposeful play is really rigor, cognitive rigor, right? So I really like, I'd like you to, anybody actually, to address how you've worked with either your teachers, parents, administrative colleagues, Board of Education, to really understand that this is real active learning that addresses rigor.
I think one of the first steps is highlighting the work behind the scenes that the adults have done, that these are experts in what they're doing, that they have been trained, that they have been coached, that they have read the resources necessary to provide this rigorous environment. It's not, I'm going to show up and throw a bunch of stuff on a table and let's just see what happens. Once again, I go back to the mantra of intention and what the impact are. I mean, it's hard to say that it's not cute when you see kids delivering flowers and talking into a phone, but you're right, EA, it takes away from the essential nature of this work. There's all these, well, there's some research out right now on on early childhood programs where we're not seeing the gains that we thought we would when children have early childhood experiences, because then you get deeper into the research because they're not quality experiences. So how do you define quality? You define quality as staff in districts that invest in this kind of work. And then when the teachers walk by and say, oh, I wish I could teach in pre-K, or I wish I could teach in K, bring them in, put the money where the mouth is, and say, you know what? I'm glad you like it. I set aside a substitute for an hour for you. And now I'm going to have you come in and you're going to observe the work that we're doing. And then we'll reflect afterwards. So maybe you can bring some of this stuff up and you can see the work behind the cute and see the science and the art behind both of those.
Anyone else want to respond to that?
I agree with Joe, because I think sometimes we use the word cute as a default with little ones. And the idea is, I think we as messengers of the importance of play have to really educate everyone to the idea of what's going on behind the scenes. And that, there is that quote, play is the work of children. It is, but play is the work of adults as well. And that's when you really learn something. So I think it's really up to us to educate, to show, yes, it looks cute, but what it really is deep learning. It is rigor. It is our children really thinking on a higher level and questioning and encouraging that questioning. So I think it is a daily battle, but I think the more we have that discussion and put it out to the forefront, the easier it will become for people to see the true work.
Yeah, and I think the results are, they're apparent in the student work and the quality of what our kids are producing. I also think, when we sit back, the videos do such a great job capturing the conversations, but when we sit back and we listen to kids speaking and interacting and solving their problems and role playing those scenarios, I just think it's the power. It's just so powerful. So I think it's the video, the field trip did a really nice job of kind of bringing it all to life.
It was interesting. Yesterday, I was in a kindergarten classroom in the morning, and they were working on a zoo because they're studying habitats and animals, and again, totally connected to science. And what was amazing to me was to see these kids. Of course, it's now May, but their engagement, their language, the type of language that they were using, the background knowledge and the vocabulary. Their kindness, their sharing, their level of detail, and their construction was just amazing. And there was nothing cute about it. I'm just saying it was all about rigor, and kids could tell you and describe the habitat and why they needed a particular habitat with the materials and the food for the toucan as opposed to the rattlesnakes. Just saying.
EA, you mentioned something about the background knowledge, and because of COVID, we can no longer assume that they're coming in with that background knowledge. So, doing all that research for the scenarios and having them live in those scenarios really does help build that background knowledge for future learning.
Oh, that's great.
And if I could just jump on the idea of the background knowledge. So I've had the pleasure of actually being a teacher of intentional play, as well as an instructional coach, and now as an administrator. And one of the assumptions I made was that my class had certain background knowledge because I was applying my own experiences. And actually intentional play really made me realize I can't make that assumption. And the idea that we have to really work to ensure that we know our students and provide them with whatever materials they need to be successful.
Thank you. And one of the things that everyone has mentioned was play planning and all the benefits that people have seen in terms of growth related to literacy, right? But what you've also highlighted, and I just have to go back to the executive function part about it, it is, I have an idea, I'm going to think about my idea, I'm going to draw and write my idea, I'm going to execute my idea, and then I'm going to reflect on it, whether it's as an individual and as a group. And so in preschool, kindergarten, first grade, that notion of being able to plan and organize your materials, your behavior, your collaboration is really something that's really important. There was a question about resources for first grade. So what I'd like to know is what you're thinking is in terms of what's going to happen for first grade as you're moving forward with this work. And then I'm glad to share some of the other things that are happening in some other districts.
I'll jump in real quick. So I've had my first grade team peek in kind of informally to see the work that's going on. I'd like to formalize that next year with more visits. And to that note, just a couple of resources. What we passed out for summer reading for my first grade team this year has been Powerful Interactions by Amy Laura Dumbro, Judy Jablon, and Charlotte Stetson, just to get the gears turning. And then what I want to move on to as a resource is Saving Play, with the subtitle being Addressing Standards Through Play-Based Learning in Preschool and Kindergarten. And I'm just going to add on, and first grade. I mean, when we look at the work, you know, the marketing is for this, but I'd like to experiment using these resources in a first grade classroom.
So I'm starting to think about what play would look like in Milford in first grade. And next year we do have the big undertaking of getting kindergarten up and running. But I have had first grade teachers who have come to me and said, I see what's going on in kindergarten. I want to be a part of it. And they are also seeing the effects of COVID on their students. So one of the areas I was thinking about is even starting with our morning meeting of having a weekly or maybe twice a week activity where they're starting to work as teams in collaboration, coming up with a plan, a challenge that they might have to come up with a plan with and execute. And that will be my first step into it. So we can start working on executive functioning skills, the planning aspect of it, make it STEM or science related, and then go from there. That was my thought.
That's what I did 2 years ago. We actually, pre-COVID, we started to pick up the momentum with moving this work into first grade. Each teacher got we call them Imagineering carts with lots of materials that kids could do. We started with like a morning provocation, right? And they used materials from the cart. So we had started to dabble in that work, and then just COVID. So in my classroom, because we started that first thing in the morning, and we were also starting really integrating the iPad work with the kids and having them use the iPads, I would record in the morning, I would record the challenge, and each group would pick up their iPad, they'd play the challenge, and then they'd have to get the materials they needed and work together as a team to complete that challenge. And when they were done, they could take a little video or a picture or something. So within that half-hour time, they had fully taken ownership of that challenge. And that was pre-COVID. I hope to get back to it. But that's a great way to integrate it into first grade.
Thank you all. I know that we need to wrap this up. The thing that I will say about first grade is that a lot of the strategies that we've talked about in terms of a daily schedule, linear calendar, who chooses first, planning and organizing your play or your activity with a prompt or provocation is really applicable to first grade, right? And some of the concepts about brain and learning are totally applicable all the way up to grades. I would also suggest that when you think about the skills that kids need for first grade, I am a huge proponent of project-based learning. I think that when kids are engaged in scenarios in kindergarten, sort of carrying that over to the first fall in first grade matters because there's consistency and continuity. The way that kids use language and their background knowledge in a scenario taking on a role is very different than when you're explaining a project. But again, I am a very huge proponent of project-based learning. More to come on first grade for sure, but a lot of the principles that we have talked about, as well as those strategies to support executive function, totally hold. And I would continue to ask us questions, but now I want to turn it back over to Rosie.
Great, and thank you everyone, and thank you EA. You've all given us so much to think about this morning, so thank you so much. We can't thank you enough for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. I want to do just a really quick shout out and commercial because if you liked what you heard this morning, if you want more information, and I know the questions are still coming in, and we will try to post resources and things for you when we put this up on the website. But if you want more information or you want to continue your learning, we are planning a follow-up in-person convening. The date is set for July 19th with details still to be determined. So watch the CAS News Blast on the website in the next couple of weeks for registration and details, and stay tuned because that is coming. I also want to give a huge shout out to our panelists, Lisa Hunter, Christine Mizullo, Amy Fettigan, Lisa Gaffney, and a special thank you to Principal Joe Macrino for not only being a panelist, but for opening your school to us for a virtual field trip. And if I were you, I would definitely take Joe up on his offer to contact him, and even better, to visit his wonderful school. Thank you, Joe, and everyone at Oswegatchie Elementary School for opening your doors to us all this morning, and keep up the great work. And finally, to my colleagues and friends who partnered with CAS to bring you this convening, including Michelle Levy from the Office of Early Childhood, who couldn't be here this morning, and from the Connecticut State Department of Education, Dr. Andrea Brunell and Dr. Melissa Hickey. Thank you so much for all your work behind the scenes as we planned and designed. And here they come convening to assist in the 2022-23 school year, and for all you do to help and support our schools, our administrators and teachers, and most of all, our students and their families. Thank you for all you do. And to everyone who joined us and this morning live, or you're viewing the recording of this convening, we hope that we have given you a lot to think about and provided you with resources to get started designing and implementing your kindergarten transition to first grade. And just a reminder, this convening is recorded and will be posted on the CAS-CIAC OEC website, along with the slides, resources, and links to our videos that we showed you this morning. One last message that I would like to leave you with is that not only is everything you heard this morning important for kindergarten to first grade transitions, but it's also important for pre-K through kindergarten transitions, as well as the transitions of students to other higher elementary grades, as you heard Amy and Joe say, all the way up to high school. And I look forward to the day when that really happens. As you begin to plan for next year, we hope you will turn your kaleidoscope and think about students differently than you may have in the past. Instead of our students being ready for us, are we ready for them? We need to welcome our students with open arms, assess their learning needs, and design personalized learning targets that are not only there to help fill their achievement gaps, but address their physical, social, and emotional needs and accelerate their learning. As our opening video explains, skills of executive functioning, self-regulation, and collaboration for every student are a must. Authentic and active, engaging, purposeful, and intentional play and playful learning opportunities that are aligned to national, state, and local curriculum, standards, and expectations in a positive, safe classroom environment are at the heart of student-centered learning. And as always, it's all about relationships, relationships, relationships. Thank you to all of our speakers today for sharing your knowledge, your expertise, and your experiences with us. And finally, we at CAS would once again like to gratefully acknowledge our wonderful corporate partners, Pullman and Cumley and Horace Mann, for helping to make this early childhood convening possible. We thank them for their continuing support of our CAS professional learning opportunities for principals and educators in Connecticut. And before you leave, we would love to have your feedback about this convening. The link to a brief survey is listed here on our final slide. We're also dropping it again into the chat. The contact information for our speakers is also listed on this slide. Feel free to reach out to any of them with your questions and for additional information about their work. Again, a special thank you to all of our presenters today. And thanks again for joining us this morning. Best wishes to you as you work toward a smooth and successful transition for next year. And in just a few more weeks, we hope you will have a wonderful, relaxing summer. Take care, everyone, and thanks for joining us.